Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Nate and Francis back for another dad chat. Nate, how's having a kid? I got some big updates, but you got the brand new kid, so curious, you've got the child that, 2 weeks passed and you're like, oh yeah, kid's talking now or walking or something like that. What big updates do you have for us on your daughter?
First ER visit.
That's not what we're looking for.
She rolled off the couch faster than I could catch her. She landed on carpet, but she landed head first. And so out of precaution, I took her to the ER. She was fine. She doesn't even have a bruise. She did have like a red mark that looked like it was swelling, but I figured out that she really didn't like a cool compress. But what I did was I took a paper towel and soaked it in water and then put an ice cube in it. And I didn't press the ice against her, but the ice keeps the wet towel cold. And she was willing to tolerate that. And that seemed to help a lot. But I called, so we have a sort of non-emergency medical service that you can call. So our equivalent of 911 is 999. But if you call 111, it's more like a routine thing. And if they assess and determine they think it's an emergency, then they'll patch you to emergency services. So I called them and did an assessment, and they said, like, yeah, take her to the emergency room. So I put her in her car seat, and because Cynthia was actually at an exercise class, I was watching her solo, and I got a text. I was playing with her on the couch. And I literally, in the flash second, she was sitting normal, looked at my watch, reached to grab my phone, and then heard thump and crying, and she was off the couch. And out of fucking nowhere, man, she hadn't really moved like that before, so maybe she hit a new movement milestone in the absolute worst way. But she's fine. I feel like the worst parent on earth, but she's fine.
Hey, Dad, check out my new moveset, and then just careens right into a wall.
I mean, heart exploding in my chest. I looked over and I hear and I see her just face down crying, and it's just like, it looks like she landed on the top of her head, which is really dangerous, but from what I can tell, it looks like she definitely fell, but she because of the way she fell, she kind of arrested herself on the couch as well. So like it was only about 18 inches high. She landed on, it's a hardwood floor, but it's got like a thick carpet, like a throw rug, and she landed on the rug. So it sucks, it's bad, but it could be a lot worse. She was fine. They said that all of her vitals were fine. She was herself. After a little bit of crying, she was normal. She didn't throw up. She was eating. She was going to the bathroom. She wasn't like groggy. She didn't have any fluid leaking out of her ears or nose.
You went the full combat medic on her looking for cerebral...
Well, we did a baby first aid class, and it's amazing how much of the stuff transfers. Like practically the only thing that doesn't transfer from combat medic or CLS and that kind of thing is there's a different recovery position for children under 18 months. And there is also burn guidance is different than it is in the military.
If she cuts her finger, don't put a tourniquet on. I'm just saying. A Band-Aid will do.
Well, yeah, they actually don't give any advice on tourniquets because they said, at least in the civilian first aid class, that even military first aid, people struggle to do tourniquets correctly. And if they do them wrong, it can force an amputation where one wouldn't have been needed. So they don't really teach it. It's one of those things where even in a situation where a tourniquet might be warranted, your best bet is to cover and put pressure on the wound for the time being and call emergency services. And so she didn't need to be in an ambulance. I mean, it was absolutely like classed as routine. I could tell when I got there, they were fine. Everything seemed fine. I did finally speak to a doctor, and he was like, yeah, this is probably least concern because she's not showing any signs of anything we'd be concerned about. Particularly, we would look for like a big spongy swelling, and she doesn't even really have a swelling or a bruise or anything forming to begin with. And we wouldn't do a CT scan unless we had all those other indicators because it's just so much radiation relative to a baby's body that we'd only do it if we like already suspected the worst. But he said, I'm not concerned. And basically, if there isn't any deviation in her normal behavior, if there's no warning signs, until you reach 6 hours from when she bumped herself, it's fine. And, as long as she's acting like herself the next day, it's totally fine to take her to nursery. And the next morning she was herself, and she doesn't even have a bruise. Like there's not even, you can't even tell. So it was probably more minor, but like, brother, it scared the fucking shit. And it was just, I do this all the time where I'll put her on the couch and I'll play piano and like I can look away. It's not a big thing. Like she moves around a little, but she's never even come close. And she wasn't close at all. My watch buzzed and I looked up and I looked for my phone, and just in that second that happened. Never would have guessed. I don't even know how she fell because I didn't see any of it. It happened that quickly.
Look, one, kids are very bouncy. It is not uncommon for every parent to have I dropped you on your head one time story for your children.
Thankfully, I didn't drop her, but you know what I mean? Like she did, she rolled.
And I mean, The kid's got a soft spot in the middle of the head that probably helps buoyancy.
She didn't land on that, thankfully. Apparently, he said that the part where she bumped herself is probably the thickest and hardest part of the skull. So, like, if you're going to take a bump as a baby, it's probably the best location if it has to happen, kind of thing. Like, if in a situation like that. But he also told me that I was like the fourth parent that day where something like this had happened. Like, it's just because, like, out of precaution, you want to get them checked to make sure. But, like, you know, it's like you'd rather be safe than sorry. But it does happen a lot. And, you know, everybody I've talked to I mentioned because Joe and I have been texting because, you know, Joe was a paramedic and the doctor was like, your paramedic friend is correct. Like, this does happen a lot.
I'd have told you the same, man. Like, a kid bumping their head off of a couch onto a carpet. Like, I'll tell you, once your kid gets to a certain age, you should have like 2 or 3 different rotational ice packs because for a period of time, children believe that the only first aid is an ice pack. And then after that, the only first aid is a Band-Aid on it. So even if your kid gets a bruise, she's going to want a bluey Band-Aid on it or something.
I can recall as a kid having a nurse who was really bad at taking blood. I would have been about 3. And so I got so many attempts because they couldn't quite get it because I was, you know, a little kid. And I convinced myself that by putting 20 Band-Aids on the injection sites that somehow I didn't hurt anymore and I felt fine. And in my mind's eye, I can recall by the 20th Band-Aid, I just felt good again.
Yeah.
And my mom just let me put 20 Band-Aids on my legs because, I mean, whatever.
Sometimes as a parent, you just have to be whatever is going to make you feel good, whatever your self-care is, 3-year-old, it's not hurting us. Band-Aids are $1 at Target, you know, for a pack of 20 of them. You can put Band-Aids on all the time. There is going to be a period where she'll probably get really into stickers as well. So Band-Aids are just stickers for boobies. Sorry for owies.
Owies, boo-boos, stuff like that.
Stickers for owies. But no, man, like, look, so I tell you, when I was younger, my nephew, who is in his 30s now, was in one of those, you know, like the jump and plays, but it's mobile, so the kid can kind of walk around. But yeah. So he was in one of those. It was Christmas, I believe. All the family was over for Christmas, and Scotty was a year, not quite walking yet at that point, but enough to motor around on his own power. And we had a basement, and we had basement stairs.
Oh, no.
And so the reason why the door was open to the basement was because we had a family friend over who brought a dog, and my dad was just like, dog not in my regular house, but dog can be downstairs in the basement doing dog stuff. And Dan had went down to check on the dog, make sure the dog was cool, and I guess didn't pull the door closed behind him. So Scotty went right on down those steps.
Oh, no.
Now, the good thing is that he kind of rode the steps down in his little walker. So rather than it being like a tumbling kind of thing, it seems like it just kind of bumped down and then spilled him out on the bottom of the stairs. And the paramedics came because, you know, kid falls down the stairs. They didn't even take him to the hospital because they're like, he's fine. You know, he was scared and he was hurt a little bit, but like in that way of now, it's just like, oh, look at all these people paying attention to me, grandma and grandpa and mom and dad, and everybody's like really concerned about me. This is great, you know? So he got over it. And, you know, if there's no broken bones, there's no big swelling, you're fine. Like, don't feel bad, especially now, because if she's what, like 7, 8 months?
She will be 9 months tomorrow.
Yeah, man. You've got about 6 months and she's going to be walking. So, like, all those books on your shelves that I see behind you are going to be on the floor, or there's going to be a baby on top of all of your books sitting there laughing at you, one way or the other. It depends on how much of a daredevil you have.
I briefly dated a girl when I lived in Alaska who had an 18-month-old son, and they came over to my place one time, and I had set up my place like a army captain who was single, who had his own place, and has a bunch of big open shelves where you just put stuff in, and all the stuff I needed to get sorted, just had them all in these open shelves. Oh yeah, that little boy found that shit right away and threw it everywhere. Yeah, I was gonna be like, wow, this is so not a toddler-proof house.
No.
At all. So yeah, I know that we're gonna be moving probably sooner rather than later, so I'm hoping that I get, you know, lucky in that regard, that we'll be in a new place, and part of the move is gonna be just getting a storage unit, because we're gonna have to probably be in kind of shorter term housing in the beginning, and then we'll look at, you know, getting an apartment in Geneva. Just takes time, even when working with a broker, because the vacancy rates are so low. I mean, the housing quality is really good. It's actually like dollar for dollar or dollar per square foot cheaper than London right now. I think I talked about that on the last episode. But getting a place is just a challenge. And so even having a broker helps a lot, because at least you're not just sort of going to showings with everyone else in Geneva who's trying to find a place. But we are most likely going to need to be flexible in the beginning. And so my thought was basically as soon as we have our residence permits and I, technically can get a thing, like get a storage unit, like I have the ID requisite for that sort of a thing, get one, and then have the movers move everything out of here down there. Mm-hmm. And then we can hive off before they pack it or pack it ourselves, the stuff that we know we will need in daily life regardless. And then everything else can just be in storage. And so, for example, this bookshelf, this is the thing my dad built, and I want to keep it, but there are some modifications I have to make to it to make it safe for kids. Basically, my plan is to use small mending plates, like ones that have 1 or 2 screw holes on either side, and use them to, because these boxes aren't connected to one another, connect them together, and then use like a right angle bracket on the top on either side, or 3 of them across the span of it, to basically anchor it into the wall. So the boxes can't be pulled out from one another, they can't slide, and then also they can't be toppled over because they're bolted into the wall. My dad was like, oh, this was before he became less lucid because of Parkinson's, was like, yeah, I'd recommend putting it on everything on a French cleat. And I'm just like, are you out of your... Whatever.
What is a French cleat?
A French cleat is a wall-mounted surface, basically. I've used them in our studio for mounting soundproofing equipment. The way a French cleat works is that it's like got a fixed span or piece of stuff or individual segments of like a piece of metal like a sturdy piece of metal at a right angle, or rather at a 45 degree angle. And then stuff you want to hang on it has basically the same thing, another 45 degree piece. So basically imagine, listener, that I'm basically making one, but with my 2 hands, the shape of like a forward slash, but one hand is underneath the other. And so the idea is that you can basically hang it from there, and it's very, very sturdy. But that's not really a thing. Like my dad used that to set up like tool organizing boxes in his workshop. That's not really a thing I can do in my home, especially in a rented home. So, however, a couple of holes in the wall for solid wall anchors for right angle brackets, that'll be fine. You know what I mean?
When you have a kid, you start getting really into anchoring shit to walls.
Yeah. Well,
you start walking around like this bookshelf that I got from IKEA that you kind of pull on it a little bit, and he's just like, all right, that's dangerous. And like my kid doesn't climb on anything, but also you start doing that like, well, we kind of are near a fault line, so what if there's an earthquake and all this shit falls on top of the kid? And I thought you were going to say a French cleat is what you put on when the Nazis are walking through Paris.
No, it's a kind of...
I'm kidding, I love you, frauds.
It's a kind of hanging thing. What's weird is, I hadn't seen this before, but also I hadn't really bought things of this size because in the US, everywhere I'd ever lived had at least had some kind of a closet. But closets aren't necessarily standard here. I mean, I would say they're probably more common than in continental Europe, but the standard configuration in old homes in the US, or rather in the UK, and certainly in continental Europe, is that you do not have closets, you have big wardrobes. And obviously in the olden days, you get a big wardrobe, they're gigantic and heavy, they're very hard to tip over. But modern IKEA stuff, less so. And so it was pretty standard on every IKEA wardrobe I've ever bought that part of the installation kit has brackets for you to mount it into the wall to keep it from being able to tip. And so I've just,
all furniture comes with stuff like that. And actually, I'm looking at a French cleat right now. When I rebuilt my kitchen, I got all the shit from IKEA because I'm cheap, but all of it is mounted to the wall using French cleats, and then you put supports underneath it. In
our studio, we have some soundproofing equipment or soundproofing installations in the control room, and then we're in the process of installing some of them in the live room. It's just that when they built the live room, they used double layered plasterboard, so it's millimeters and not inches, but it's basically 2 inches of plaster. So getting the right anchors for that is just a thing. I found them, but a lot of things that come recommended as hollow wall anchors will not work in double skinned 50 mil plasterboard. But in the control room, it's a cinder block and then solid, like cinder block wall and concrete ceiling. It's like a slab ceiling. And so installing stuff, we have the right tools now for it. We have a SDS drill, and that works great for concrete. So we're able to install stuff. And the wall panels and the ceiling panels are pretty straightforward. They're just your garden variety anchors that you put in. But the base traps, which are corner mounted things, basically like they're they're like a triangle shape where imagine like, think of the right angle of a corner of a wall, right? Like this on the screen. And then imagine you're going to draw like a 45 degree angle to make a triangle in that corner. That's what the base trap does. It absorbs sound, the vibrations, etc. And it dampens sound, particularly because those lower frequencies will echo off surfaces like that and in corners, apparently. I don't know a ton about acoustics. I just do this stuff for a living. So there's a certain level of like, that's what the expected treatment of the room would be. And that actually came with French cleats. So we had to install the French cleat in the wall and install it into the bass trap itself with wood screws because they're actually pretty light.
Yeah, they're not heavy.
They're just like very thin MDF board or plywood board. And then, they've got an insulated filling and then they've got like a carpeted kind of like cloth texture cover. But the thing about it is that we in our control room, there is a lot of trunking, like for cables. And it's not like, convenient trunking for internet cables or something. It's power cables. So you don't want to mess with it. So what Milo and I did was we actually took a piece of wood, maybe a 1x4 board, but completely bolted that with the SDS drill into the wall. So it's affixed in the wall. It was because the trunking is also 1 inch, we figured out. So that 1x4, that thickness of 1x4 is perfect because then it creates like a flush surface to where that wall trunking is. And then once we had it bolted into the wall, we then affixed the French cleat with wood screws and then hung the bass strap up. And like in the past, we've been pretty slipshod with our DIY, but this time we stopped one day because we didn't have the right tools. We got the stuff we needed. We leveled it multiple times. We measured it multiple times. We cut it, drilled it, etc. We installed it. It's the most fucking accurately leveled, correctly positioned thing we've ever done. Dude, I know you know this feeling that after years of installing fucked up shelves that kind of work, that is such an accomplishment. It feels so amazing to actually like stick the landing in a way you've never done and not have a single time where you're like, oh, I've messed this up. I have to start all over again kind of thing.
Right. The pod shack is paid off now. So it costs like $5,000 to have the shack itself actually built, and I had to finish off the inside. And it's been almost 2 years. October will be 2 years that I've had this, and I really have okay, I know all of the mistakes that I made here, and I really want to tear all of the drywall out and rewire and rework the whole thing. And it's just, that's not a weekend project, unfortunately. No. And it's not a cheap project. It would require a couple $1,000s of electrical and then I'd have to re-drywall everything. Ugh, I don't want to do all that. So I just kind of suffer with this at the moment. During the summer, it sucks because there's no ventilation in here whatsoever.
Yeah, you were telling me about it. And obviously, that would suck here, but in Missouri in summer, it's much different.
Yeah. This thing gets broad sun all day. So it gets...
Do you have a heat pump or a ductless mini split in there? Because wouldn't that just be unusable during the summer? I mean, that's insanely hot.
I have a portable air conditioner.
Right.
That helps. But again, it's not ventilated. So the heat doesn't escape anywhere. Yeah. And my plan originally was it's not too hard to put a through-the-wall vent fan. So I was going to put one up near the top and have that vent out. But my wife's just like, why would you do something that's going to be a temporary thing? Because you can get through-the-wall air conditioner heaters that you don't have.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The ductless mini split thing, because those have improved a lot. But even 10 years ago when I was using them in Korea, also my apartment in New York had one. It was kind of rare, but it was good.
They're great. My old house had one.
They're great as air conditioners, and they're great if you get them the correct model. They're great in pretty much all winter temperatures until you start getting into the below the 20s in Fahrenheit. And you can still make it work. It's just then you need the kind of underground digging installation for circulating stuff, because if it's just air, that air is too cold. It won't be able to heat it up enough. But the exchanger, I think is what it's called, is the whole relay you have to have installed.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing. Through the wall or a wall air conditioner with the heat pump in it is something I can install.
Yeah, absolutely.
But a ductless mini split is something I have to call somebody to install.
I mean, ductless mini split is the same thing what we're describing. It's more the through the wall one. It's just that the thing that involves let's make sure. No. A ductless mini split is the one that has the outdoor one, the unit that had big condenser unit outside, and then it has the tubes that run through the wall, and you've got the head unit in the room. The tubes basically connect through that hole in the wall, and typically you either have to plug the head unit into a socket in the room, or you have a DC power cable that runs back to that condenser unit. Is that the same thing?
So yes, it acts as if for you Americans, your central air conditioning, you have the big thing outside with the fan. When that kicks on, your air conditioner is going, because that's the thing that's circulating the air. Mm-hmm. So a ductless mini split has something that's very similar to that sits outside. It's usually a lot smaller because the mini split is meant to cool a small portion of your house, like a singular room. The problem with those, because I have had one of those installed before at my old house, because we had a room that couldn't be considered a bedroom because it didn't have heat in it.
I remember you saying that, yeah.
Yeah, we bought a mini split, and they are fairly cheap. You know, nowadays you can get a decent one for $600 or $700 for something small like my little thing here. But it does require somebody that can run copper and that can do the charging of the air conditioning and all that kind of stuff. And it's not hard. You don't specifically need an HVAC person to do it, but it is outside of my abilities.
Sure, yeah.
Now, when we're talking about cutting a hole in a wall and
That's
reinforcing reinforcing the hole and then plugging it in, I can do that. So that's why I'm kind of going with that's my plan. But that piece is, it's like with that, and you have to buy a sleeve to put it into to protect it, because through the wall, the ventilation is different than a window air conditioner, because, the sides are going to be covered up because you're going through a wall. So it's a little bit different, but they're like, altogether, it's like $700 or $800 to get everything that you need.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I want to do it because, like, obviously, I have a shipping area for the store in my basement. My basement's nice and cool because it's all concrete, it's underground and everything. So during, like, yesterday at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was like, fuck this, I can't be out in the pod shack anymore. It's too, even with the air conditioner blowing directly on me, it was too much. So I moved down there. But yeah, I would like to get that installed, and I know it's not too difficult, but it's just like, hey, do you have $700 laying around to do this? Not really. So I gotta spend $600 tomorrow getting my fucking car fixed. So
you're basically the real life 2024 version of that 90s commercial for Sears air conditioning about, like, I cannot live another day without air conditioning. I'll call tomorrow. You'll call now. I'll call now.
Yeah.
You remember that one. You can find it on YouTube. Look up I'll call now air conditioning commercial, where the hot part is shot with like red, like orange filters on the camera. And then the cool part is like they're eating strawberries with a blue filter over the camera, and everything's cool and nice and they don't look sweaty anymore. Like, it's a classic of the genre. What's funny is I was thinking about what you're describing, holes and reinforcing it, is there's a thing that I've got I'm working on where I did some system upgrades in our studio, and like the technical side of stuff worked, but there are just a few things that I would have gotten done a long time ago if I hadn't constantly been sick, and then my daughter was sick and my wife was sick, so it's been a nightmare. But so we have the soundproof room that I was telling you about, and so it's basically in the basement. They built a new enclosure. They built an enclosed room, and they brought power through from the original ceiling. They, like I said, double skinned the exterior walls. They put insulation, and they use these kind of like isolating brackets on the actual wall itself. So where the enclosure touches the walls of the structure, it's isolated off the wall itself. Mm-hmm. And then there's, like sound insulating foam in between it. And so they pulled forward all the electrical power sockets, the Ethernet drops for the network, the building's network. And then we had them cut a pass-through panel so we could run cables from the live control room to the live room. And so it's pretty small. It's the size, like you in the UK, you have like single gang and double gang plates. They're not quite the same size as American sockets, but they're like lengthwise, like rectangular, that kind of a thing, instead of the American rectangular vertical socket thing. Mm-hmm. It's slightly bigger than that. And in that, basically, we've got a bunch of different connections that I have got a new custom setup from a US manufacturer. But the problem is that getting it to fit has two issues. Number one, when they installed it originally, when they cut away the plasterboard, took out the insulation, and did this pass-through, the way they did it was actually they took pieces of wood and used wood screws through the plaster to fix it, and then used bolts to basically drill it into to hold it in place. So they reinforced it, but the problem is that they didn't do any kind of like installation of anchors for the mounting screws that hold the plate in place, hold the face plate, right? Mm-hmm. So what's happened is they just drilled straight into plaster. Over time, with like it being pulled on and moved and removed and stuff, it's actually broken the plaster away. So there's nothing holding it in place. And also, I changed it up a little bit because we were doing a digital transmission thing, and the system works really well, but it brings along some problems. And one problem is the digital head unit, like amplifier unit for the live room, is a Yamaha model, and it's got an internal fan that can't be turned off. It's loud, and you hear it on recordings. Oh. And when you have 4 people in there and 4 mics picking it up, there's this buzz. I mean, it has to be removed. It's not hard to remove it, but it's annoying to have that. Whereas What we realized was there's all this workaround stuff that I've kind of conjured up for digital signal transmission, but you can just pass analog signal through the wall. You just need to have the right connectors. And so what I did was I had someone in the US design this plate to the UK spec sizes, which is, was the thing they offered, with a pass-through for all of the connections we have now, plus 4 DB25 ports, which you remember DB25.
Oh, I do.
Yeah, because DB25 is the old printer ports from
it is
our days and our parents' days of computers. But some audio heads figured out down the line that DB25 is actually great because you can run 8 balanced audio connections with 8 separate grounds while also having a shielded cable shielded on its own. So you have 25 connections, think about it, and 3 poles per audio connection. So you get 8 total balanced audio of positive, neutral, and ground, and then a ground connection for the cable itself, on the casing and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's not like the world's most durable, but it plugs in, it screws in, you have the 440 screws to screw it in, and it holds in place pretty well. And if you get it fixed, like once you've got them set, I've done sound checks where you have a continuous signal running through. You pull on it, you can't really get it to let go. You'd have to break the fixtures. Like it's pretty good. Problem is that when I got the stuff, I had a specialist make these cables for me because, brother, I am not fucking soldering 50 connection points per cable.
I'm with you.
I know I can do it. It's just too much work.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that the initial one, their recommended size was like, they can do custom ones for smaller sizes, but their stock lowest size was 0.5 meter, so like 18 inches. Mm-hmm. Well, here's the problem. 4 18-inch cables in a space of about maybe 10 to 12-inch gap in drywall, you have so much cable excess. Like, basically, you have to stuff it someplace. And remember what I said before, that to reinforce the thing, they had put the pieces of wood. Well, they put long wood screws through, so you have these sharp screws sticking through. So if you try to cram all these cables in, they start getting punctured by these screws. And the pressure of trying to fit all of these cables in means you're squeezing things, stuff's getting disconnected, stuff's getting out of joint, and it's actually pushing against the wall plate. And now the wall plate can't hold in place anymore because the plaster is fucked up. So here's my proposed solution that I'm hopefully going to start executing soon. I bought some PVC piping that's the internal diameter is the right size for 832 screw, which is the ones they use on the mounting plate. I actually checked the specs on the mounting plate. I checked the fucking diameter of the hole. I checked the head angle of the screw to make sure that the countersink would work. And basically, the PVC piping, the idea is to cut a small piece, put it into the wall, that gap, plaster it over, let it dry and cure, and then run the screw through that now more or less cemented in tube, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like you put it in place so that it cements in correctly, so you know it's not in the wrong spot, but you don't install it, as with tension because you don't want it to rip out, and then use a washer and a nut on the back of it to tighten it down so that at least holds it. So, but then also get shorter cables, and there's another cable manufacturer that makes these. I've used both kinds of cable, and this other one, it's more expensive, but it's got way more flexibility. And so get a 20 centimeter cable instead of a fucking 50 centimeter cable, and use the more flexible cable spec. And then basically, hopefully, when that's all said and done, because the setup works. We've been using it for a while. It works. It sounds great. It's copper to copper. You don't need to use the thing with the fan. There's way less noise. There's less ground hum because of connecting headphone amplifiers and stuff. But at present, the soundproof curtains are obscuring the fact that half the panel is hanging off the wall because you cannot fucking connect it into the wall. I can't move down to Switzerland and leave it like that. That's kind of a nightmare.
Right. You got to figure something out for him.
So basically, yeah, this wasn't my fault in terms of the plaster getting ripped out or the thing. There's all sorts of issues. The panel manufacturer did a good job, but it's obviously made on a 3D printer, and even just the regular tensile strength, the tension from screw connections has caused some of the cutaways to break. So I had to find this specific kind of melamine plastic compound to to make an epoxy to repair it. It's been a bit of a nightmare, but
yeah,
eventually it'll be done. And once everything has more or less been tested, you shouldn't need to open it up and change anything as long as things are seated correctly and not running the risk of shorting or getting bent or anything. And if it's all said and done, if I can actually make it work, then I'll be able to pass 2 USB-C, and I've actually gotten spec'd Thunderbolt 4 or USB 4 things, so high-speed USB-C, 2 of those, Cat6a, HDMI, USB-A, and then 4 DB25 connectors. So it's a lot of stuff. And when you connect the panels up, to when I was doing testing, the best way I could describe it was it looked like you'd pulled something out of a wall on the Nostromo from the movie Alien. Like, it's just so weird looking to see all those big, huge connectors, like 4 of them in series with really thick cables. The cable, like the hilariously named gender changer is like bright yellow on the edges, and then the cable was purple, and the stuff is like shiny kind of stainless steel, and everything about it looks sci-fi. But at the end of the day, it's really boring. It's literally just how to pass signal through a wall with keystone jacks and such, so that you don't have a big hole in your otherwise soundproofed enclosure. But that means testing every cable, testing every connection, making sure everything's seated correctly. It's boring work, and it would be a full-time job if I didn't have another full-time job, and also if I didn't have my adorable puking and pooping machine daughter who, you know, for example, 2 weeks of my schedule got derailed because she couldn't go to nursery because she was sick.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's life, but like,
yeah.
That's kind of like what I'm working. But then this weekend, hilariously, like I'm doing something completely different, which is we are finally cutting this lumber we bought months ago to build a console table. I've designed it, so we'll see if I'm an idiot, but I've tried to be really, really thorough in how to design a very long table so that it's got stability. You know, it only has 2 long kind of like bench legs, so we're doing a cross strut all the way across the back to make sure that I'm using an apron to hold. I'm using, what is it? I think they're called carriage bolts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using a pocket jig cutter to do pocket screws to connect, to mate up the apron and the like forming the table legs. And then it's going to be hopefully very, very sturdy and enforced. And if it fails, in the sense that like if I can't make it work, one solution that we have is what we already have in some of the other tables, which is just to use scaffolding piping to make an adjustable. Basically, you can use scaffold mounts on either side that have Allen key screws, so you can adjust like the height of things and get a length of pipe cut to what you want and just use that as like a stabilizer.
Mm-hmm.
If I play my cards right, if we do it really carefully and we take the measurements deliberately and do it the right way, we should hopefully have a very sturdy table that can handle the weight of a bunch of things without rocking or bowing. I definitely used the resource called the sagulator, which is assessing how much a shelf or long-running board will sag under weight depending on its thickness and length. According to the sagulator, my design is absolutely fine.
Well, we'll see how your sag goes.
Yeah, and also we had a tabletop built because I realized that we could do it ourselves by doing basically by mating, you know, gluing a bunch of boards together to make one of the right length. But to do it correctly, you need to have clamps I'd say at least 18 inches, probably more like every 12 inches, right? And for a nearly 3 meter long table, that is so many clamps. And like good bar clamps are not cheap. And so we looked at it and we're like, it will cost us more to buy the right kinds of bar clamps for this than it would to just have a wood shop make it for us. And like, don't get me wrong, I like woodworking, but I'm not trying to run a woodworking studio, you know? And I don't have room to store 12 bar clamps. So yeah.
More than once have I thought, I bet I could do this, and then, you know, you look into, like, what do I need to do this? Like, oh, I'm not spending $500 on the shit that I need to do
Yeah,
this.
because it was like 400 pounds to have the tabletop built, and it was free shipping, whereas it would have been about 375 pounds to buy all the bar clamps. And then we still have to cut the lumber ourselves, glue it, sand it, you know, have the space involved. Like, so much of it is just, yeah. So we'll see. I have used all these things before, and I've tried to be, like, really precise, and I bought some really, really good wood drill bits, like hopefully the ones, you know, appropriate for what I need. We'll see.
Don't be afraid to just be like, I'm going to buy some cheap bits that I don't care if they get all fucked up while I'm doing this, because I've done that myself too. So.
Yeah, I just had to use, there's a couple of things where I'm going to be using, there's the carriage bolts, basically to hold the because most of the table is built out of either 1x4 or 2x4. In the case of the legs, the kind of wide long legs, they are going to be 1x6 boards that are mated together to make like a long slat board, and then you have 2x4 pieces on either side on the feet to make feet that are longer. That are what's the right word here? Like they run deeper than the leg, than the depth of the leg, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So you have like extra footprint on them. And I've got sorbethane pads to put if I need to kind of like balance it out and stuff like that. But I'm hoping it's even. I mean, like if we measure it correctly, I know the floor is level. So I used the software called SketchUp to just design it. I trolled the shit out, or not trolled, but trawled rather, the shit out of like Reddit woodworking and all sorts of woodworking sites learning about this stuff. I got a bunch of different pocket jigs, like for both smaller and larger construction. Like I have one that you can actually, cut pocket holes on a 2x6 with if you need to. So in the end, like, we'll see. Our goal basically is on Friday, we're just going to try to set the goal of cutting the lumber, of like take it slow and just cut the lumbers to the correct spec and make sure that everything looks good. If we have time, maybe we can build some of it, but then I'm supposed to go in on Saturday with my friend and he's going to help me assemble it. And if it's all said and done, fingers crossed, we'll finally have a console table set up in the basement and we can start setting up like the actual studio equipment the way we want to. So it's like, that'll be a huge, huge milestone if we can make it work.
Right on.
We'll see.
I told you that I had big happenings for me as well.
Yeah.
Not as exciting
as... dramatic kid stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So my daughter turning 9 in July, and she does Irish dance.
Yeah.
Irish dance, for the most part, especially for younger, is mostly dominated by girls.
Yeah.
Mostly girls, but there are boys that dance. Obviously, if you ever go, Michael Flatley, most famous Irish dancer.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of male Irish dancers, but there's a boy in her class that she has had a crush on for a long time. I think all the girls kind of have, and he was gone for a little bit. The story that we got was that he kept going through growth spurts and was not able to get shoes for a little bit, because one great thing about the dance studio, especially for all the younger kids, is that when my daughter grows out of her dance shoes, we put the shoes in a bag, we write a price tag on it, like for used shoes, in this big box that parents can be like, oh, my kid needs this size shoe. The Hortons are selling these shoes. I can buy shoes for, cheaper, because they're not cheap. Like, as you can imagine, dance shoes not cheap. But she cornered this boy and was very excited about him being back and gave him a big old kiss. And look, this is the age for it.
Sure, right. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, it's a thing where you probably have to have a conversation about boundaries, but also like, she's 8. Like, I presume he's also 8.
She understands consent. We have been very adamant about that because she can sometimes be a little too touchy, but the first thing my wife asked is like, was he okay with that? Did you ask permission? She's like, yeah, I asked if I could kiss him. And I said, look, that's cool. I mean, go for it.
I guess it's one of those things where it's like, I don't really know, because in the sense that like when I was that age, it wasn't that I like didn't like girls, but all of my friends that I only wanted to spend time with were all other boys, which I think is pretty normal when you're 8. Mm-hmm. And obviously we lived in Germany. I had some really close friends there. We all liked video games. The girls in our class, like we were friends with them, but like we didn't hang out with them very often unless it was like somebody's birthday party. The only time I can remember a girl kissing me was like, she was probably like 5 and I was 7. So I was just like, okay, whatever. You know what I mean? Like I didn't think anything of it, but I guess it's like, I don't know how I would have reacted, but also I was never really in an environment. The only environment I was ever in where I was surrounded by girls was I was in like an art class, but like they were all much older than me. So none of them was going to kiss me. You know what I mean?
None of them kissing you. Yeah.
They were like 11 or 12. They were probably, properly preparing to try to like have first dates. And I was in second grade. So very different experience.
Yeah. You're at the stage where all the firsts are very cute and fun and exciting. And I'm at the stage where all the firsts are very frightening and a little worrisome. And I don't know, I'm not that worried. Like she's crushing on a boy in her dance class, whatever. But it is that like, oh, I guess this is, kind of the
first stages of growing up in a way. Yeah. I think it sounds to me like you guys are doing everything right in the sense of you're having the conversations where it's not like she's doing it without asking, right. And she, in the sense of like, it's a thing where also a lot of it depends on how other parents feel about it, because it can be a thing like the kids' parents might be like weirded out. That's one of the things like it happens. Like people forget that these things kids are like this. And like, it's one of those things where I know that'll come eventually, but I'm hoping that like, by the time that our daughter is old enough where she's in that same situation as your daughter, that it'll be more like, if it's a thing that she's proud of or she's happy about or whatever, she tells us. If it's a thing she doesn't like, she tells us. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
like there's not this fear of like, am I going to get in trouble if I tell the truth about something like that? In the sense that you don't want them to feel like they have to keep secrets in that regard, especially when they're that age. When they're older, they're going to regardless, because that's just natural. But when they're that age, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, my child lies like a rug all the time to us. But it's a boundary testing thing. It's not like...
I think I was kind of the same way when I was a kid, yeah.
Yeah, she's not doing it out of malicious things. It's just like, did you brush your teeth? Yes. Go brush your fucking teeth. Don't lie to me.
I had this game that I loved to play when I was that age of, I'm lying now, but I'd still do the thing that I needed to do, so the lie wasn't a lie anymore.
Right.
I was sort of like asking for the truth on credit, basically. But yeah, I mean, it's just the nature of things. I haven't
brushed my teeth, but I will brush my teeth right now.
I'm going to.
Which is also perfectly fine. I don't mind. She also, I mean, because she has ADHD, it's difficult. You tell her to do something and, you know, we're realizing it's like you have to get her to stop and look up from the book that she's reading and look you directly in the eyes and say, I need you to do this thing. And then you have a 50% chance of it sticking, but it's better than the 10% chance you had beforehand.
You might let her know that I am almost 40 years old and also have ADHD, and I'm the exact same way. Yeah. I've learned a lot of things to kind of like mitigate that, but 100%, if I am really invested in something, and someone asks me something or tells me something, it will go in one ear and out the other. But once I've sort of broken the concentration, it's fine. I'm very easily able to go and knock out whatever I need to knock out. It's weird. And last night it was, I wish I had gone to bed earlier. It was one of our friends, sort of in the general sphere of TF, hosted a fundraiser for a Palestinian family, which was great. And they raised a ton of money, but they didn't realize using the Twitch stream that it was tied to the Trash Future PayPal account. So we suddenly were getting a ton of transactions on PayPal. And then PayPal was like, yeah, we're going to lock your account now. At first I was like, what is going on and why are people paying us? And then I figured it out and it's like, oh yeah, and by the way, you have to submit all this documentation to prove that your business owns this account now, or you can't get this money that's going to help a family evacuate. So
right. Well, that's, you know, I have ours set up. Well, mine set up as a business. That was like one of the first things I did.
Yeah, ours is too.
I'm trying to be better about having a business. Like I bought a light box because all the photos for the stuff in the store really sucks. And my most recent project is finding old cigar boxes and turning them into dice rollers for like Dungeons and Dragons. So you open them up and I put lining inside of them and I put like little dividers and stuff like that. My house is not falling apart, so I don't have a house project to work on at the moment. So I have to find something else to do with my hands, and that's kind of what I'm working on, which is nice. It's nice to have a little project to putter around with. But I've been in the basement a lot the last couple of weeks getting stuff ready because we've got events and we've got a gaming convention that we're trying to get into to sell stuff. So we're trying to do a lot more in-person sales, and it's never end. Like you said, you know, having multiple full-time jobs, having my IT job and having this job and then having the parenting job thing is all crashes into each other, and you don't really seem to ever sleep. But
yeah, I mean, my problem, I think, is that there's like a lot of different threads running between different shows, things that need to be managed, and we're working on trying to professionalize them. But, you know, for example, I have to wear a lot of hats, and I have to be the IT person, I have to be the sort of marketing person, art direction person in some cases. I'm the sound editor or the executive editor. I have to give instruction to people if they're helping us. There's a lot of like logistical things that have to be managed with stuff like deliveries and installations and, you know, visits from things that need to happen, the cleaners visiting the studio, all these things. And then other people's projects, like, you know, long-term goals, trying to keep that straight. Like just going down the list of, it was funny, Milo and I had a catch-up call not that long ago. I just haven't been in the studio very much lately because of all these things that have been happening about like what needs to be done in the studio. And it's very funny to go down the list because it's like, cut the lumber for the table, install the rest of the bass traps that have been there for almost 3 years and we haven't installed them, you know, solve the problem with them using the wrong hollow wall anchors on the curtain rods, get a better curtain rod, get something so we can actually uncover the acoustic window without potentially having to like take the rod out every time, you know, get the new cables for those DB25 things, finish making these volume boxes that I've basically, it's real simple construction of a potentiometer and a resistor so you can take a line feed basically and someone can have a plug-in, you know, at a set volume, then they can lower it to their preference. You know, you set it to like a safe, tolerable limit, and then they can lower it. I've made 3 of them and they work great, but I just need to make more of them. It involves soldering and twisting cables and, you know, that kind of stuff. I haven't had time to, you know, install shelves in the basement, install shelves in the upstairs, cut some of this excess MDF board that we've got and get it installed. The places where we've messed things up and had to patch them over with like sealer, like actually put plaster and like a top coat thing, skim that and repaint it so it doesn't look as messed up. We've got some areas where it looks like we might have rising damp, like moisture seeping. We need to get that checked out. Get a dehumidifier for the basement because we've noticed it gets humid in the summer. You know, fix one of the heaters that for some reason just doesn't turn on anymore.
They're going to call you so much when shit breaks.
I know, man. The downstairs toilet is below the water line, and so it's got a macerator and a pump, but that actually hasn't been serviced since we had it installed 3 years ago. No, it doesn't get used very often, but if it breaks, that's a catastrophic problem. So
Yeah.
that has to get serviced. We have to get some cleaning agent and put through it. We need to replace the locks because the doors are really old. We need to have the air conditioner looked at because it's from the original construction, so it's probably 20 years old. I can't imagine it's been serviced in over 10 years because the building was empty. Like all these things, and it's like, that's just from an hour conversation, us kind of brainstorming what needs to get done. That's not even anything to do with the creative projects. That's the funny thing.
I'm just thinking of the episode of Aqua Teen Hunger Force when Frylock moves out and Meatwad and Master Shake just are living in the house, burning styrofoam for heat because they've got nothing else. The whole thing falling apart.
The good news is that I'm not like quitting. I'm just not going to be in London anymore.
Right. You can't swing the hammer. That's fine. You give it to Tom. He can swing the hammer.
Part of my setup has been to make things as remote accessible as they can be so that I can hopefully, if there's a problem that can be solved remotely, I can remote in.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been testing that and configuring it for a while because I do that quite often. Like, just because of it's annoying dealing with, this is a side gripe, but I'll tell it really fast. Google pushed a firmware update that you couldn't opt out of to the mesh Wi-Fi thing that we have that solved some people's problems, but created them for us. And now it has basically throttled our connection. And the only time you can get the full speed of the connection we pay for, which is a 900/100 asynchronous fiber connection, like a fiber to the home connection, unless you are running a speed test on the router, it's basically capped to like DSL speeds. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's so stupid. But we're moving, and I'm gonna donate these
not
fucking...
Not a problem.
Yeah. Eventually, that's not the studio, that's at my house.
Yeah.
But in the studio, we've got a faster connection and that's stable. It's a fiber to the premises connection. And so what I just do is I remote into the computer and download shit that way because like it's on a hardwired connection that's not throttled by stupid Google shit. So I've got a million things. But we are supposed to do Ask a Dad, so I'm going to let you go with that.
So have you always wanted to be a dad? Or was there a period of time when you didn't think you ever wanted to have kids? Yeah, I would say like most of my 20s, I didn't want to have kids because I was a mess, to be honest. Like I was just a hot mess of a human being until my wife kind of took a hold of me and just like, you can be better than this. And I always knew like with her, I was like, okay, she's the one that I'd end up having a kid with. None of my exes, I don't know, like I haven't had an ex-girlfriend since I was 26. So
yeah.
You know, it's hard to say because I've been with my wife for 14 years at this point, you know, marriage and dating. So, you know, all those times beforehand when I didn't want to have a kid, it's because I was a 24-year-old alcoholic. So, yeah, I didn't want to have a kid then.
I think when I was young, like really young, I think I found myself, even as a small child, kind of being the sort of asked to shepherd and marshal little kids around. And I didn't mind it. Like, I would make friends with them in a way, like as much as you could when you were 7 or 8 taking care of someone who was 3 or 4, like not taking care of, but like
right, watching, entertaining the child,
sort of being like the don't fall down the stairs playmate. I think I was like, I didn't really care. I wasn't particularly interested in as like a preteen tween age. But I'd say by the time I became a teenager, like I think I did. And I think it was weird. I'd have these moments every now and then taking care of like kids by surprise. Like I remember a friend of mine was like, dude, can you help me? Like my parents and their friends went out to something and they left me like taking care of this 3-year-old girl and I have no idea what to do. And I was like, sure, man, I'll come and hang. He's like, I'm bored. And also I don't know. And like, I remember having to help her with something. And then she just sort of like made the pick me up gesture and was sort of like, yeah, I'll just stay here. And I was like, yeah, I'm good. I can take care of you. And it was one of those things where I was like, yeah, you know, I think, but I was probably 18. I was like, yeah, I think I'll be okay. But I never thought like my goal is to have a kid anytime soon.
Right.
And then I think also just because of the fact that I was either single for a long stretch of time or was in relationships that weren't healthy. Like, yeah, there wasn't really that thing as a possibility, but I think I did know I wanted to. And then once I got married, I mean, that was kind of things that Cynthia and I talked about when we started dating was that we both did. I mean, like we were obviously going to be trying pretty late, but we both did want to. But I think she had previously, you know, thought that she might not. And like, she was okay with it. Whereas I feel like for me, like if we were able to, you know, conceive our daughter and have a child of our, you know, biological child, we would have pursued adoption because I think we both wanted to be parents regardless. You know, it didn't matter if our child was genetically related to us or not. And I think we were both at that point, like we both agreed on that position. And so, yeah, I'd say...
Get yourself a weak little Victorian boy to take care of.
No.
A sad Victorian child with socks pulled up to his knees.
I think that one of the things that's really kind of difficult about it is if we did want to, for example, in Switzerland, it's very difficult because they had a weird, like a scandal from at least the post-war era into the 90s, where kids were in state care or in orphanages and were more or less farmed out to like rural families to be farm help. And these kids were like exploited in labor terms and just general cruelty, but also in some cases, like in the legal sense, abused.
Right.
And so they have made it very, very, very hard to, they try to go out of their ways to make sure that people can, like, basically, if there is any way to reunite a child in care with any family member, they will do that. And almost no one puts a child born in Switzerland, like, put it this way, there's so few things like teen pregnancies or unwanted pregnancies where people carry the child to term and put them up for adoption, that there's basically, it's in like maybe single to maybe double digits in the entire country of children who are adopted that way. So a lot of times people will foster children for like years on end and then they'll go back to their family. So you can't really, and international adoption is just kind of shady. It's hard to avoid it being shady. And so there's a lot of concerns. So I don't know what would happen, but I know here in the United Kingdom, like these kids are in such bad situations. It's so dire, but we're leaving. Otherwise, like, that would have been a thing. And we could have, if we'd wanted to, foster a child through our council, but we are leaving now. And so that's not going to happen. But there's a lot of kids who need it here. And unfortunately in the UK system, a lot of kids in care, they've privatized it. Like it's really shady, but they've privatized it through sort of a loophole where a private investor opens a fake charity to run a care home and just pockets huge amounts of money, like $200,000 per kid per year. But obviously the kids aren't exactly living in luxury. They're living in your garden variety, grim, damp, miserable British existence. But, a sovereign wealth fund from the UAE is pocketing a fuckload of money for it. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not making it up. And of course, if you were to guess in 45 years of Tory, conservative dominance, which party did this come in under? You'd think, Margaret Thatcher, John Major, David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, not Liz Truss because she was only prime minister for like 46 days, Rishi Sunak. Nope. Tony Blair. Yeah. Of course it was Tony Blair because all the really bad shit happened under Blair.
The British George Bush.
No, the British Bill Clinton. Oh. But way more right-wing than Bill Clinton.
All right. Well, Nate, thank you so much for doing another Dad Chat. This has been fantastic. I'm looking forward to your book on how to set up your own slipshod kind of studio in the basement of a place that you're renting. I feel like there's a book there. I feel like there's a way that, kind of a how-to book that you can build there. And I'm also going to help Joe set up the space that he's getting in The Hague. And with any luck, I'll get my own commercial space in Geneva and set up my own personal one. So yeah. I'm becoming a guy who travels around Europe setting up recording studios, mostly for podcasts. But you know what? Like, the most fucked up Johnny Appleseed ever. I know, right? It's like when you think about where I started my career versus now, it's like whatever. But frankly, like, I presume I'm going to keep doing this in the next year, 2 years. And at that point, I'll have been doing this longer than I was in the Army, which was the longest job I'd ever had. So I'm basically a sound guy now. That's what I do. Cool. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you haven't checked it out yet, we have some good bonus content up. I'm going to be doing an Ask a Zoo Crew episode that's going to go up this week. Also, last week, if you missed it, I spoke with Texas journalist Christopher Hooks about going to HapsCon, the Habsburg Convention in Plano, Texas, and meeting the Habsburgs and all the crazy American monarchists out there too. So check all that out. That is out on the feed. Nate, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. Yep, have a good one.